else in the panel, or she'll pass it to the audience?
Two quick questions. One, I wanted to pursue something, Professor Mohr, that you discussed at the beginning with respect to efficiency and fairness. Do you think we should perhaps come at taxation from the standpoint of defining what is a fair and equitable percentage of wealth, of a person's wealth, that should be contributed to taxes, and then on that platform build the method or the mechanism of tax from that? That's my first question. And secondly, Professor Niman, I was going to ask you, sir, on the form of government and that sort of thing, if you favor, I know that I think it's the state of Nebraska that has a unicameral legislature.
The only one in the country.
Yeah, and it's a reduced number of people, professional, paid, with a substantial staff, I believe, Alex, that you talked about. So that's my second question, if you could comment on that, sort of, for Professor Mohr.
So I think it's interesting that you phrased it in terms of wealth, because this is sort of a distinction that gets lost in this discussion of time. When economists think about progressiveness, I've seen the argument a lot. We should be thinking about not in terms of income, but in terms of wealth. So you can be wealthy and have relatively low incomes. And for the property tax, this is a real issue. What happens if you're property rich, but income poor? Are you rich or are you poor? You certainly don't feel rich. And the fact that you made a good buy on your house 40 years ago and took care of it and had a good investment doesn't make you feel rich either, right? But at the same time, you are rich if you have a very expensive lot. So I think your proposal that sort of a starting point is to say define fair in terms of wealth or income, and at least sort of say what's perhaps define unfair, where the limit is useful. And I think circuit breakers, which Richard talked about, some of those can deal with this problem of being property rich and income poor. For example, being able to defer payments of property tax if you have low income, and then when the house is sold eventually or inherited, that at that point the deferred property taxes get paid. It would seem to me a much fairer way of thinking about that. So I think part of this answer is not entirely scrapping the property tax. Just from the graph, you can see that it's not possible. And so part of the answer has to be what Richard mentioned, is thinking about sort of innovative ideas of how we can deal with low-income people and how we can deal with people who are what I would call property rich and income poor, and alleviate those burdens. So yeah, I think that's a good starting point, of sort of defining fair a little more precisely.
I just wanted to add a thought on that idea of a wealth tax as opposed to an income tax, because I've had people say, well, the property tax is like a wealth tax because it represents real value. And my response has been, if you want a wealth tax, have a real wealth tax where you tax all wealth, because for the average people, their house may be just about their only asset. Whereas for a wealthy person, they may have a $500,000 house and then a $3 million stock portfolio, but we're only taxing the house. We're not taxing the $3 million portfolio. Florida actually had something like a wealth tax. They called it the intangibles tax, and it was 1/10 of 1%. I think they got rid of it partly because the rich lobbied against it, and partly because it was very hard to police. How do you figure out what people own? So although a wealth tax would appear to be the fairest tax, if you're talking about ability to pay, it's probably the hardest to figure out, to administer.